A hugely controversial decision was immediately justified at Formula 1's Japanese Grand Prix, which was deceptively interesting beyond a stagnant race, so here's everything we learned at Suzuka. The fastest car in Japan didn't win the race because it wasn't even on pole. That was partly because of Red Bull getting its own car into close enough territory to let Max Verstappen's genius do the rest, but it was also down to McLaren underachieving. McLaren team boss Andrea Stella admits its car is still the best in Formula 1. But its full potential wasn't reached on Saturday, as neither driver really nailed their final Q3 lap, then couldn't be tapped into on Sunday when Stella said McLaren was stuck in a rabbit hole. McLaren has a small but decisive edge on pace, maybe a tenth or two, but even if it can be bigger than that in race trim, it still wasn't enough to follow closely and pass at this track. Its other, more critical advantage is tyre management, but this was also negated because the resurfaced Suzuka circuit made it an extremely low degradation race for everyone, which is a key factor in why it was so boring to watch. Much was also made of McLaren's strategy in the race, pitting Lando Norris at exactly the same time as Verstappen and then not ordering Norris to let Oscar Piastri by to attack Verstappen in the final stint. But McLaren's desire to be fair to both drivers left it a little stuck on strategy, as it couldn't try to undercut Verstappen with Norris without hurting Piastri or extend Norris's stint without costing him too much time. Plus, it didn't feel Piastri was actually faster late on, Norris was just stuck in dirty air. A consistent message from the Red Bull camp at Suzuka was that it just needs to hang on long enough in the title fight for the flexi-wing clampdown coming at round 9 in Spain. Red Bull knows Verstappen alone is its best chance at a championship. He's in electric form and has probably not left a better result on the table this year, which means he's now just 1 point behind Norris in the standings. But he needs help to stay in contention all season long, let alone win the title. And Red Bull's convinced that the rule change that will be enforced in June will have an impact, even if it's not 100% sure how much which way. So it feels this first third of the season is all about staying in the fight, and Verstappen's doing just that. Before Red Bull and Verstappen turned things around and won at Suzuka, their trickier than hoped for start to the season was framed against the expectation of fighting for both titles. But Red Bull is still a one-driver team in championship terms after Yuki Tsunoda's pointless debut, and that means it's already 50 points behind McLaren in the Constructors' contest. The upshot is, 2 titles aren't really Red Bull's focus anymore, and its messaging at Suzuka was also all about supporting Max. Red Bull senior motorsport advisor Helmut Marko has said the whole team is focused on a 5th title for Max, while team boss Christian Horner confirmed our priority is the Drivers' Championship. Ferrari's failure to match the pace of Red Bull and McLaren in Japan perhaps finally confirmed that the team is facing a particular sensitivity in being able to run the car within the ride height range it would like. A fortnight on from Lewis Hamilton's disqualification from the Chinese Grand Prix for a worn plank, where Ferrari had pitched its ride height too low, it had to be conservative and raise the car in Japan to avoid repeat trouble. This has further hampered a characteristic of the car where the squad is battling the compromises between low speed and high speed ride heights, and it's this which holds the key to a decent step forward. Ferrari is understood to be working on a solution that can help it maintain its low speed strengths, but then still get the car into the right operating window for the quick stuff. This emerged as Hamilton made comments about a deficit to Leclerc's car post-race that left an awful lot open to interpretation, claiming there was something on the car that's been underperforming so far and costing Hamilton a 10th a lap. It seems there's been some setup divergence as Hamilton chases a more creative solution to the limitation affecting both cars. Although Red Bull's wider decision-making process remains under scrutiny given how quickly it abandoned Liam Lawson, Suzuka indicated the decision to swap him and Yuki Tsunoda was the right one. Neither had a good weekend on paper, with Tsunoda finishing 12th and Lawson 15th, but both showed good pace, despite not stringing together the weekend as well as they should have. Tsunoda immediately looked more at home in the Red Bull RB21 than Lawson did, making good progress through practice. He then as good as matched Verstappen in Q1, but in Q2 he had just one set of fresh softs to use and didn't get the tyres in the right window, leading to wheel spin off the chicane and a snap at turn 2. But despite that, he justifiably feels that he made a good start. Lawson had the easier assignment, jumping into the Racing Bull's VCarbo 2 that he confirmed has a wider window than the Red Bull. And while he couldn't join Isaac Hadjar in Q3, he did show signs of having the pace to do so, and he at least outqualified Tsunoda. A strategy gamble in the race, running long on mediums and switching to softs, left Lawson 17th. More will be expected from both in Bahrain, but they showed underlying promise at Suzuka despite not executing as well as they should have done. At 18 years, 7 months and 12 days old, Kimi Antonelli became the youngest driver to lead a Formula 1 race and to set the fastest lap in the Japanese Grand Prix. Antonelli only beat Verstappen to the youngest race leader record by 3 days, but nice as they are to have, the substance of his weekend was a lot more significant than these records. Antonelli had been lost in practice, clearly lacking the confidence of teammate George Russell in the high-speed first sector, and unsure why he didn't seem to be improving after the first session. He had to dig quite deep into his driving. Antonelli got a lot of help from Valtteri Bottas, Mercedes reserve driver, assisting with lines and approach and what he could do better. Antonelli's not just an extremely gifted driver, but an intelligent one and a hard worker, and he needed all of that to untangle the mess he was in just in time for qualifying. Although he still wasn't quite on Russell's level, Antonelli went from being a serious risk of not even being in Q3 to earning his best qualifying result yet in F1 to start on the same row as his teammate. That saved a weekend that was going nowhere fast and set up a good race with strong tyre management and an attacking final stint that will give Antonelli a lot of knowledge and confidence. The Racing Bulls car looks like the strongest midfielder. Note, we are not necessarily saying fastest, even though the VCarb 02 has been the quickest midfield qualifier for all 3 Grand Prix so far. It's certainly a car that is quick and consistent across a broad range of conditions. While that didn't translate to results in Australia and China thanks to strategic blunders, Hadjar put the car to good use by qualifying 7th and finishing 8th on a great first F1 weekend at Suzuka. So far, the other contender for best midfield runner has been Williams, and given how tricky the Williams was at Suzuka, Alex Albon declared it second best in that group. And it's the fact the VCarb 02 appears to be a consistent and benign car that means right now it's the car of choice in that pack. After all, Suzuka is a very tough test of a car aerodynamically, and being so competitive there, having also shown well on very different tracks before, makes it a formidable package in F1's Class B. Ollie Bearman excelled with a risky shortcut floor development by Haas to help cure the car's main problem, but Esteban Ocon toiled. Haas fast-tracked revised floors for both cars at Suzuka that were designed and built before testing the solution in the wind tunnel. That was because of an aerodynamic problem that left Haas miserably uncompetitive in Melbourne and a high likelihood of it reoccurring at Suzuka. On Friday, Haas kept Ocon on the old floor for the 2 practice sessions, with Bearman using the new one, and gradually went more aggressive with its setup before firmly concluding that the revised floor was better. So both cars were on the new floor for the rest of the weekend. Bearman made it into Q3 and scored a point in the race, but Ocon was anonymous, qualifying and finishing 18th. Ocon hinted after qualifying and the Grand Prix that the new floor just didn't improve as much as it should have done, and after the race that it worked on one car. But team boss Ayo Komatsu said the data showed the benefit was there in both, so unless Haas has missed something that wasn't obvious, this just looked like a tricky event for Ocon for a different reason, one Haas seemed to not understand by the end of the weekend. There's only one pointless team in F1 after 3 races, and that is Alpine. It had the potential to score for the first time in 2025 at Suzuka, but a familiar old weakness let it down. Pierre Gasly was a clear top 10 threat in practice, but couldn't quite make it into Q3, and after starting on the fringes in 11th, Gasly fell away from the points rather than challenged. It wasn't a perfectly executed Grand Prix, but this track also highlighted the extent of the engine deficit that has long held Alpine back on certain circuits. In qualifying, at least a couple of attempts were being dropped on the straights thanks to a sheer lack of grunt, and in the race, the battery can't be charged as well as rivals, so the deficit is bigger. At Suzuka, Alpine's car was potentially the 5th fastest in the corners, helped by some setup changes made based on learning from how much it had struggled in China. But its total package can be ruthlessly exposed in such a dense midfield, leaving Alpine rock bottom in the championship despite everyone expecting it to be a midfield leader. Lance Stroll had a torrid time in Japan, finishing last, while Fernando Alonso is still yet to score a point this season. But Aston Martin left Suzuka feeling it may have unlocked some answers about just what is wrong with its AMR25 and why its drivers are lacking confidence. Some strong pace shown on Friday, even if the FP2 performance was flattered by red flag chaos, was followed by much bigger headaches for the remainder of the weekend, as the car seemed to be in a totally different performance window from Saturday morning. Stroll qualified dead last, while Fernando Alonso hustled his car as much as he could, but it was not enough for Q3. The team has suspicions that its difficulties were triggered by the 180-degree change of wind direction from Friday into Saturday, which made its car go from looking decent to being a bit of a handful and suddenly bouncing again. It points to some extreme aero sensitivities, but the shift was big enough to give Aston Martin reason to feel that finding out what happened can help it pinpoint just what is wrong with its car. F1's ongoing debate about V10 engines looks to be further ramping up, with it emerging in Japan that manufacturers have been called to a meeting with FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem in Bahrain this week. Taking place on Friday, the aim of the get-together is to help the FIA better understand where the car makers see the future direction for engines, and for the governing body to explain why it feels action needs to be taken to bring costs down. But while Ben Sulayem may be hoping that his push to deliver a future engine roadmap that secures F1's future can get rolling, there is far from the consensus that he wants. While Ferrari and Red Bull are believed to be in favour of the change, and as early as 2028 or 2029, and Mercedes is open-minded to at least discuss things, Audi and Honda are staunch supporters of the next generation turbo hybrid engines. With any plan to alter the rules before 2031 requiring support from 4 of the current 5 manufacturers, 2 outliers are enough to kill it off. Ben Sulayem is not the sort of person who happily gives things up without a fight though, and it will be fascinating to see if any concessions are put on the table to try to win over the skeptics.